Good afternoon, friends. And it gives me great pleasure to be here for the session that is dealing with regulators and institutional framework. And in this session, I thought I'd just highlight a few points because I have people both on my right and left who have done a lot of work. And basically, I'm also interested in hearing them. There's Subhashish Gangopadhyay on the right, and I thought it would be better while you have a little bit here to introduce yourself. But before I ask Subhashish to introduce himself, let me just mention that I am from the Competition Commission of India, the member there, and therefore my role here is a chairman, since what we are bothered about is every regulator guards his turf. Having said that, let me ask Subhashish to introduce himself.
Thank you very much. As Dr. Gauri said, I am Subhashish Gangopadhyay. I am an economist by training, and I am the research director at an organization called India Development Foundation, or IDF, and the Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences at Shiv Nadar University. Now, what I'm going to talk about is something probably very different from what you have...
Subhashish, shall we take up afterwards? Just introduce yourself and then we can start the rest, or you want to start?
First you want to go through? Oh.
Yeah, because then let me...
Sorry, I take back everything that I've said.
No, I think I should introduce Subhashish. He is a delightful person, and naturally delightful because he's an economist. And has always taken a differing viewpoint, including ones on Bengal. On my left is Rohan Samarajiva. And just a few words, I'll ask Rohan to speak about himself, because there's a very interesting background, as he's the founding chair of Learn Asia. Sure.
Thank you. Actually, the relevant element of the discussion would be the fact that I was present when you more or less created regulation in India. I was the regulator in Sri Lanka at that time. And I can remember coming here in 1998 after the first auction, after those prices had been paid, and people were trying to figure out why they paid those horrendous prices. Luckily, those errors were rectified in the 1999 policy, and I have been involved with all the TRAIs, all the chairs, and working very closely with them, partly when I was in government, and then now as running a regional think tank that works throughout South Asia and quite a bit of Southeast Asia and the Pacific, dealing with issues of this type, but not, of course, limited to telecom regulation.
Is Eric Whitlock, and he is now part of a very interesting consultancy service called Nathan Associates. But even more interesting is that he has worked on regulatory aspects in Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. Eric.
True enough. Thank you very much. Yeah, I am working with Nathan Associates, which has an office here in Delhi as well as an office in Chennai, and we are mainly competition economists. However, I've spent 20 years in telecoms regulation. Started in doing lots of work with Nathan, actually, in Soviet, then it was Soviet, and while I was there became the Russian Federation. But have since then been working globally, including extensive work in Europe and the United States. I'm also I've spent quite a bit of time within the industry with cable and wireless, a decade there. There's more information in the bio that's been handed out to you. I should say, given the heavy weight, academic weight that's represented here today, I do have a PhD in economics that's not noted here. So I do somehow qualify to speak with you all.
I don't know whether it's a qualification to have a PhD or a disqualification. Thank you, Eric. I thought what would be appropriate is that there are one or two issues that only I will raise, because I think that would set the trend, but I leave it to my friends on the dais to decide whatever aspect they want to emphasize. Would 10 minutes be fine? 10 to about, take a little bit more. So that would mean 30 minutes, and it will have a little more time for discussions, and we can take questions. But you know, to set the trend, and because this is on the regulatory and institutional framework, as I said, you know, there is a certain role for a sectoral regulator, and there's a certain role for the market regulator, not the capital market regulator, but the market regulator itself. And it always looks as if there is a certain amount of turf fighting, and we've had a lot of allegations from TRI on the CCI, which we take it in our good spirit. But here, I'm not here to try and look at whose capabilities and whose turf it is, but I think the important issues that come up in terms of defining the turf and whose institution it should go and what are the regulation that comes into, I think it's very, very critical in looking at the aspect of competition. And the reason why I say in looking at the aspect of competition, TRI came out with several consultation papers, but there are two which I would just like to make a reference to. And this is on the consultation paper on monopoly and market power and TV cable service. And of course, the recent one on MAN policy. We have, of course, sent some of our views. But the critical issue in deciding whose turf it is and how you define the market. And that, I think, is extremely important. It is not that the Competition Commission has got it right or the TRI has got it right. That's not the aspect of it, but how do you define the market itself? And when you're trying to look at the market definition, one has to keep in mind that this is the kind of area which is so digitalized, and there is the question of network economics, there's a question of platforms, so there's a question that has a lot of diversity and a lot of homogeneity itself. This afternoon or this forenoon, we were hearing Rama Bijapurkar, who's been talking about consumers and the differentiation. And then we try to understand what could be a relevant product market. And when we look at it in the TV and in the cases that came up to the Commission, we found there's so many divergences. It's interesting because the questions that were asked in the consultation paper went on to say, is there a need to address the issue of monopoly or market dominance in cable TV? The second question that was asked is relevant market in the cable TV market, and the third one is how to curb market dominance, which I personally found it very strange, because while the questions were very relevant, the whole aspect was to try and see if you can regulate without relating it into how you would define a market in this growing technological era. Similarly, when one looks at the mergers and acquisitions, and they question that spectrums are coming together, and one person buys another one, there have been a lot of conditions that have been laid to with the object that there will be a concentration of economic power, leading to all the effects that arise from monopoly. Here again, I feel it depends on how you are looking at monopoly. Do you take it on an ex-ante basis, or do you look at it on an ex-post? And when you're looking at it at ex-ante basis, there is a host of questions that come up. And having stated a little too much and trying to show off my limited knowledge, I will ask Subhashish to set the ball rolling.
Thank you again. Let me start all over again. Since my other two panelists explained what they do, what their work is, let me begin with a confession. I know nothing about this topic, right? It is Rajat who is responsible for getting me here. I do work on something which I will try and relate to what the issues might be over here, especially because Dr. Gauri talked about, since she represents the Competition Commission of India, and we are talking about regulatory issues and turf battles. So what I would do is I would try and talk a little bit about what I do work on, and that is a little bit away from what I presume is the discussion topic so far or will be. Now, the place where I differ is that much of the discussion I heard, the little that I heard in the morning, was focused on the products and the services and how they interact, the companies which provide them, and how the government is an agent and how it plays a role, etc., is what I was listening to. What I would focus on is something slightly removed from here, in the sense that I'll be focusing on how the input market to these activities play out, right? In other words, I'll be talking a little bit more about patenting and what we would call the market for ideas, which feed into the ICT sector and especially into telecom in a very big way. And there's a lot of things happening in the world right now in terms of how these things are being reorganized. And it is important for us to know, both in trying to regulate markets as well as in trying to understand, right, what sort of strategies are being played out. It is good to figure out how these things are being done. So what I will do is, instead of getting into any complexity, I'll just tell you a very simple story, right, which is essentially a bunch of numbers that I will give you, which are a simulated exercise. I will not go through that exercise. I'll just give you the numbers and you will see how important the issues are. Now, how does it relate to regulatory issues? Because if we look at competition issues, not regulatory issues, then we talk about competition issues first. If we look at issues in competition, then obviously these are network industries. She talked about a platform and applications written on them. So there is a lot of market dominance that can take place in various ways, and companies would strategically try to position themselves to act as blocks to other competitors. So obviously it's a ripe area for people to jump to conclusions about how these things work. But please remember, one of the big problems of network industries is, of course, that since what we would call operational costs become lower and lower as you start expanding your size, so there is also a very, very strong market motive for companies, right? And on the consumer side, if any of those cost savings get passed on, right, then it's difficult for the Competition Commission to intervene, right? So there is this constant, conflict that has to be reduced. One, in terms of the rules and regulations or the principles that we have developed in the standard competition issues in the marketplace, versus this new technology driven mostly by network industries in that scenario. So as I said, what I will do is I'll start with a very simple story. So if we heard a little bit about auctions in the morning today, before lunch, and so it's very common for us to see these auctions, especially when it comes to things like patents, right? And oftentimes it's not just a patent that is bought, but a set of patents, a group of patents, a collection of patents that are bought, right? And very little people know about how these patents are. They have hunches, they think that they can do a lot of things. So when they go and try and bid for these patents, they do essentially what Aruna was talking about in the morning, right? They have their own hunches about the valuation. And there's a huge literature on this. But the one that I want to pick out is the following, that if we look at how patents are being bought, as I said, one important thing is that they're being bought mostly as pools, as a collection of patents from companies which are either going out, she talked about M&As, right? Or are hiving off their patents as people hive off or companies hive off their assets. And instead of competing companies, right, bidding against each other, what they do is they get together and buy this pool of patents as a consortium. Now, if we were to take this, right, into the buying of wheat, or probably the auctioning of spectrum, right, then all of us would say this is anti-competitive, right? This is collusive bidding, or bid rigging, etc., right? So the question that comes up is, why is it that we see this happening all the time, and the US Department of Justice as well as the European Court, which are all very active in trying to stop this, the European Court a lot more, right? Why is it that they're allowing this to happen? It is important for us to understand why, right? Especially because we always look at what other countries are doing. I think it's important also to know why the other countries are doing what they're doing, right? So it's important for us to know this, so that in future, these sorts of, these issues do not become conflicting issues in India, right? So that's the example I'm going to give you. Now, what happens in much of the economics literature outside of network economics is that we do a lot of, or we have a lot of literature on R&D spending, on patents, on trying to win the technology race. All of that is tied to the current story on patents. But there are two basic differences with what we are facing today from what the literature has done so far, right? So what we are facing in the literature, rather, sorry, the literature, what it has done is it has talked about technology as incremental improvements, right? So it helps the company to improve profits because they've hit upon a great idea, which they have then implemented. After innovating and commercializing it, they have implemented it. And even if other companies see it, they're not allowed to copy it if this company has taken out a patent. That literature we have developed very, very well, including, all the strategic plays and all of that. The other thing, if you notice the way I told you what the literature has done, what is important in the literature is that the person who ends up with the patent, right, not only uses the patent, but has also produced the patent, right? And therefore it makes sense to talk about incremental improvement in value. But what is happening today in a knowledge-based economy, because, right, both the input and the output in the knowledge sector is the same, right? So there is no tangible thing that you're looking at, no inputs that you're buying, right? So it's essentially you're taking a bunch of knowledge and adding to that, and the outcome that you have is another set or another piece of idea, right? Now these people who produce the ideas, these companies which produce the ideas, these entities that produce the ideas, especially so in the drugs and pharmaceutical industries, never do anything. They have no use for that, whatever they produce. They just pass it on to somebody else who will probably use it. In other words, what we see today in the market for ideas is that the producer of the idea is almost always not the user of the idea, right? And this is new, right? So when, for example, when this consortia of companies, they bought up the Nokia patents, they bought up the Novel patents, right? Nortel, right? When they bought all these things up, they were essentially not the producers of these ideas. They were buying it of entities which had often not even used the idea, right? They had just held on to them for some future valuation if possible, right? So that's the situation we see, and this is what we would call bid rigging. So these are the 2 points. Producers are not the users, and the fact that these are not incremental valuation increases. Now, what are these incremental valuation increases? What is so special about the patent thing, especially in these industries, is that not only do you become a monopoly user of the patent once you buy it, right, because it's treated as private property under the modern patent laws, right? It's not only you're a monopoly user and you have the right to allow others to use it or not, but more importantly, when you get it and use it, not only do you increase your profit, you destroy the life of somebody else. And that is not there in the earlier literature. In other words, if I come up with a new idea, not only do I increase my profit, and the standard literature said what is the cost of generating this idea through R&D, etc., what are the expected benefits, should I do it now, should I wait, if I have gone 3 steps, should I announce a 3rd generation product or should I wait for the 4th generation product? All of these things we have studied in the literature, right? But what we haven't studied is that if the seller of the idea is a separate entity and we are 2 incumbents fighting for that idea, if any one of us gets it, the other, excuse my language, is screwed, right? So that is the sort of issue that is taking place now, and there the entire analysis of what is competitive and what is anti-competitive changes. Especially because, remember, competition is not a goal in and of itself. Where markets work, competition gives rise to efficiency and social welfare. That's the reason why we wanted competition. In fact, the fact that there are regulatory bodies clearly suggests that we are fully aware that some markets do not work. Natural monopolies, you have a regulator. Network industries, you have regulators, right? So obviously we are aware that in these cases, the same benchmark that we put on competition cannot be put over here. And so we are well aware of that. So let's see how it plays out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up some numbers because it's so suppose there are two companies, A and B, right? And they're all identical because we are economists, we're allowed to assume anything, right? So there is no non-homogeneity in this, right? In fact, there is nothing non-identical about these two companies, right? Excepting that they hate each other. So two identical competitors, A and B, each making a profit of 225. These numbers have not been cooked up. These numbers have been derived, as I said, from an actual model by putting in some parametric values, right? So therefore, the numbers are important. The ordering of the numbers is important. And now a new idea comes to the market, right? And that somebody is waving a new idea which whoever buys it will be able to increase profit.